This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Hello, everyone. We're coming on the air with breaking news from Atlanta, where something both historic and now somewhat routine is playing out. Former President Donald Trump has departed the Atlanta airport. He's on his way to surrender to authorities at a Fulton County jail. Mr. Trump has been indicted already on 13 counts for his alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. The former president will surrender to authorities at the jail. They will process him, fingerprint him, and possibly take his mugshot. That's a live aerial view right now of the motorcade as it makes its way toward the jail. The process the former president will undergo is what many of his co-defendants have already gone through. You can see their mugshots here. Mr. Trump and the 18 other defendants are accused of engaging in what the DA called a criminal enterprise to overturn Georgia's election results. All have been charged with violating the state's racketeering or RICO law, often used to prosecute organized crime. This is the fourth time the former president has surrendered to authorities this year, but this time will be different than the other three. While he will be processed and released on a $200,000 bond tonight, he will still need to be in court in 2 weeks to be formally arraigned, though it's not clear if he'll return in person or show up remotely. As we look at this picture of the motorcade, let me bring in Blaine Alexander outside the jail. Blaine, the officials there have said nothing will be different with President Trump versus the other defendants, but clearly that can't entirely be the case.
Absolutely not, Lester. We know that this is going to be an extremely expedited process. We've already seen signs of this moving much more quickly than it does for any normal person who's coming to this jail. Typically, a person could wait some 12 hours to be booked in, processed, and booked out. But we've already confirmed, NBC News has confirmed, that he has hired a bail bond agency to handle his bail from the Fulton County jail. We've confirmed with that agent that there is a person inside and spoken to them. And we understand that that bond has already been paid. So when you talk about the fact that there's already a bond agreement in place, again, $200,000 bond, and the fact that it's been paid, we know that he's going to spend very little time in here. We expect that it will be, in fact, less than an hour, if not even shorter time than that. Now, Lester, as I was watching that motorcade, I was recognizing some of the scenery there in Atlanta. I know that he is very near. In fact, if you'll look right here, we see a flurry of activity. We see law enforcement streaming by in a very clear show of force. This is Jefferson Street. This is the street that the former president will enter. This is not the main entrance of the jail, mind you. This isn't the place where most inmates walk in. This is kind of the back area as you watch this motorcade beginning to come right here. We'll watch this and let it play out. But again, we're seeing these flashing lights behind us. Very clear that the motorcade is beginning as we expect to watch some vehicles carrying the former president coming in here into the jail. Now, as for how long he's going to stay inside, Lester, go ahead.
Yeah, Blaine, earlier there were supporters of the former president as well as some protesters protesting against him. Is the crowd nearby?
Well, they've been on both sides. The larger crowd is on the other side, not the side where he's coming in. But there, Lester, we saw some good 50, 60 people standing outside in oppressive heat, mind you. We're talking about record high temperatures here in Atlanta. Some people drove from some 9 hours wearing Trump T-shirts, carrying signs, Trump 2024 signs, making it clear, telling me that they wanted to be out here to show their support for the former president. Now, I should point out this street has been locked down, so nobody other than media and a high number of security can actually be here. Law enforcement can be here on this street. So many of the protesters that we saw driving through earlier have had to move elsewhere. But we understand from our teams on the other side of the courthouse, rather on the other side of the jail, that before this was locked down, you certainly saw a large number of supporters, a large number of people who wanted to make their presence known, Lester.
Yeah, obviously we're going to keep this shot up. We're not sure if we'll see the former president when he exits and goes into the jail. While we watch this, let me bring in NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett. Laura, flurry of activity today regarding the timing of a trial. Suddenly the timetable moved rapidly forward.
It did, and that's in part because at least one of Mr. Trump's co-defendants, one of the people that the DA believes is sort of behind a fake elector scheme, that scheme to put forth those pro-Trump slates of electors, his name is Ken Cheeseborough, he put up a demand and said, I want to take this case to trial. I have a right to a speedy trial. And the district attorney had to respond in kind. Under Georgia law, she has to honor that, and the judge set the date for October 23rd. But that doesn't mean that date will necessarily stick. We all know that these things are unpredictable, and it may be the case that it gets pushed out. And it may also be the case that he goes it alone. He doesn't have to be tried with any other defendant, Lester.
All right, we're watching the motorcade. It's made its way to a carport there, so we're not sure we'll see him or if he will exit the vehicle under that carport out of sight. Kristen Welker also with us, our senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson. Kristen, let me start with you. There is a sense that this was choreographed in terms of the president really kind of calling the shots here, the former president, in terms of when this would occur.
Well, and it's notable that what happened last night was the first GOP primary debate, and now here he is turning himself in, not 24 hours afterwards, to some extent really capturing the spotlight, if you will, Lester. Look, I've been talking to folks who are inside his orbit, and they are striking a very defiant tone. He did this online interview last night that got 200 million views. They've been touting that to kind of talk about the fact that these indictments, they believe, are only making him politically more popular. But if you dig a little deeper and talk to some of those in his inner orbit, there is also some concern that this is taking place and unfolding in a critical state, Georgia. It's a state that he almost certainly would need to win in order to be reelected in 2024. And so there's concern about that and concern about some of the images that we may see if he, in fact, has a mugshot taken of him. What would the impact of that be politically, Lester? But we know that this is a former reality TV star. He's no stranger to making use of images, and I wouldn't be surprised if he used a mugshot to try to energize his supporters.
I wanted to bring in Hallie in that. You know, when we first heard about the mugshot, most people would think of that as a negative, but the way he has been embracing his fate here, you know, for his own election chances, kind of changes everything.
I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it, if it happened, sold on T-shirts in his merch store, Lester, because that has been part and parcel of the tone from Team Trump all along. They see this as political persecution, and that's how they've been casting it and framing it to supporters of the former president. To the point that Kristen's been making on the optics, it is extraordinary here. Whether we get a mugshot or not, we have been looking live now at the former leader of the free world at an active jail. This is not a federal courthouse. This is not ceremonial. I mean, this is the real deal. This is where a lot of defendants go to end up booked, just like Donald Trump, who not only is the former president, but is the current Republican frontrunner. There is a political risk here. We've talked about it a bit. In the primary, most Republicans are standing by the former president. We have seen that in recent polling. Half of Republicans, for example, in a recent Fox poll, do not believe that he did anything seriously wrong when it came to election interference, which is the crux of the case that he's facing here in Georgia, as well as that federal indictment. But look more broadly, half of all respondents do, right? There is a difference to how this plays essentially politically in the primary election versus the general election. And that's where I think some of this concern is coming from. If Donald Trump is the nominee, what happens in a state that is such an important battleground? Let
me bring up Blaine Alexander as we look at the vehicle stacked up outside that carport. Blaine, I know you've talked to people about this facility. It has frankly, a bad reputation, but also it must, walking into a place like that must strike you about the weight of what you're facing and you know, the darker corners of the criminal justice system.
Lester, that is what makes this situation in Georgia so different from the other legal challenges that the former president is facing, among other reasons, of course. But yes, the fact that he is, as Hallie said, surrendering to a jail. Let me tell you about this jail, by the way. This is a jail that currently is under investigation by the Department of Justice to see if it violates, has any civil rights violations, investigating the conditions inside. So what we have is this really stunning image of the former commander-in-chief walking in to surrender at a jail that is currently under investigation by the government that he used to lead and the government that he's currently running to lead again. So if we just soak that in for a moment, that's just stunning in and of itself. But when you talk about the details of it, that jail is meant to hold about 1,500 or 1,600 people. It has been plagued by overcrowding in recent years. Bed bugs, in fact. In fact, one person recently died after being covered in bed bugs. The sheriff has been trying to get more money to build a new facility, told it'll cost cost some $2 billion to get what he needs in order to house the amount of inmates that they have. So just a number of issues around this jail. But now, of course, we need to put it in perspective. It's very unlikely the former president will, of course, be in any of those cells. He's not going to be inside for any long amount of time. But when you talk just about the facility that he is stepping foot inside, that certainly lets you know just the gravity of this situation, Lester.
All right, Blaine, thank you. We'll ask you to stand by. Let me go to Gabe Gutierrez. He's also outside the Fulton County Jail in Atlanta. You've been near some of the demonstrators there. Were they able to see the motorcade as it entered the complex?
No, Lester, and actually we're around the corner from where Blaine has been reporting from. This is actually the main entrance of the Fulton County Jail, and as you can see, there are now several dozens, if not more than 100 demonstrators that have, some of them have been here really throughout the day, and we've seen an increased security presence that has been ramping up throughout the day, Lester, just as a precaution. This has been a very calm crowd, not much tension here, but there is a lot of frustration by Mr. Trump's supporters that have come here. There have been a few counter demonstrators as well, very few of them. But I want to talk to one person really quickly. I just met you, Penny. She's from Atlanta, and you decided to come here today. Why are you here?
I'm here to support Donald Trump and every American's right to freedom of speech.
And do you think, you were telling me earlier, you believe that President Biden did win the 2020 election, but you're not a fan of these prosecutions, you don't buy the charges?
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with us, Penny. And Lester, we have spoken with others here who are frustrated, and then they do believe that this is a political persecution. This is something we're hearing over and over again. One of Donald Trump's surrogates, Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene, also here reiterating that message. And I'm just now being told that former President Trump is inside the Fulton County Jail, as you heard Blaine say, a notorious jail for a number of reasons under federal investigation. The former president of the United States now being processed. And the question will be, will we see that mugshot? Just earlier today, we did see the mugshot from his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who's out on $100,000 bail. But again, just a credible thing to witness here, Lester. All the former, or dozens at least, former President Trump supporters, if not more than 100 here, are out here trying to get the message across that they believe that this prosecution is unwarranted.
All
Lester.
right, Gabe, thank you. Let me bring Laura back. We received word that he's officially been booked. Yeah. Walk us through the steps here, because we've seen two of these in federal court. We saw one in state court in New York, in which he was essentially arraigned. The first appearance is an arraignment. At what point does that happen, where he's able to plead not guilty or guilty?
And every state does this a little bit differently, but the reason that we're seeing this in sort of a two-step situation is Georgia actually has you come in, you surrender, and then the arraignment, where you hear the formal charges, that happens at a later date. And that may happen the week of September 5th. That's what the district attorney wants. We'll see exactly what date it is, but we now have the booking information here, which lays out all the charges. It lays out the bond amount. That's something that's different in this case. In other cases, he's been released on his own personal recognizance, which basically means you sign a statement saying, I'm going to show up. In this case, he had to use a bail bondsman. Again, it just sort of underscores this is a different type of case. This is I think, perhaps a more humbling experience walking in the facility, as Blaine and Gabe laid out. I mean, this is a place that's, has bed bugs, right? This is not a cozy environment. And again, being able to have to put up money, essentially, not, actually paying money to the court, but using this bail bondsman to sort of expedite the process so that hopefully that he doesn't have to stay any longer than he would want to there. You can imagine why someone would want to do that. But even, again, just sort of the simple things like having to provide your weight, right? Like, these are things that you can imagine the former commander-in-chief is not in the position to want to do.
Let me throw out a political question, and that is, we've talked about how the former president has drawn strength from these prosecutions, but there will come a time after this arraignment that this will get quieter, at least in some pockets. So is it really, I mean, you've talked to the Trump folks. Are they concerned that over time this will kind of fade out of the daily headlines and that he's left with the scar of it all?
I think they are concerned about the fact that it will start to chip away at his support, if not in the primary and the general election. And Lester, to your point about what we expect to happen over time, these court cases and court proceedings are going to intersect with key dates on the campaign trail. And that, from a logistical standpoint, poses particular challenges. So I think that is one of the concerns that they have in terms of keeping it in the spotlight. I think he is going to do that. I think you are going to continue to hear him make the case that this is a political persecution, as Hallie said earlier, that he is fighting on behalf of the American people. This is a line that we hear over and over again from him. So I think he will find a way to keep this in the spotlight, even in the private moments. But again, it's the general election. If he, in fact, does win the nomination, that's particularly problematic when you think about independent voters, when you think about women voters, when you think about that voter who voted for him in 2016 and voted for Joe Biden in 2020. These images don't necessarily help win back that voter, which is what he would need to win the White House again.
It is the collision of the political and the legal timelines, Lester. So even if the sort of high-profile live picture piece of this were to fade away in a few months, as some of these legal filings go back and forth, and we wait for at least one of these trials to begin potentially before the 2024 election. Even if his Republican opponents in the primary do not make this a character issue, you can bet Democrats will once we hit the general if Donald Trump is in fact the nominee. So this will not be far from the forefront. That said, for the next few months, think about the next big political thing happening, right? We've been through the first Republican primary debate now. We'll have a few more. We're going to hit Iowa here in January, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. We have seen many of the former president's Republican rivals take a pass on trying to land a punch on him, with the exception of maybe Chris Christie and some others, people who are not polling nearly as high as former President Trump. The political landscape for him makes it such that he's the one who gets to drive the narrative on this issue as it relates to the GOP primary.
And I'm just hearing, according to the website of the court, that he has completed the booking process and has been released. So we may see at least the motorcade on the move again. Chuck Todd, I think you're with us, the moderator of Meet the Press, and you know, these conversations about the former president's fate sometimes get lost in politics versus law enforcement. This idea that he's playing to the court of public opinion, will that matter in the long run?
Well, it probably won't matter in the courtroom. I say probably because we don't know how much influence this could have on potential jurors. But look, let's remember the intention of Donald Trump. As the legal walls were closing in, he decided to become an active candidate much sooner. And I know this gets lost, but it's one of these things. He essentially decided to wrap his legal problems and his campaign into one, believing essentially the only way he can save himself legally is to somehow win the presidency again. That is the ultimate legal strategy he has, because when you look at everything he's facing, he's not going to win all of these cases. The only way he pulls this rabbit out of a hat is if he somehow wins the presidency. But I will tell you, I think as this continues to progress, there is just enough Republicans that this is going to not be easy for him to survive and somehow get through both of these things. This is, I know we're so used to Trump always being able to pull these things out. I think we have to watch this play out. All I will say is the convention is next summer, and there's a lot of time between now and that convention when they officially have to nominate somebody.
All right, Chuck, thank you. Let me bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas. Danny, this process, this booking has happened rather quickly. As we mentioned, the word is now out that he has been released, and we expect to see him here anytime. This idea of treating him like any other defendant, is that simply impossible?
There were talks, including from the sheriff, that Trump would be treated like any other defendant. But of course, that was never going to be the case. Most people who get booked in jails, whether it's in Fulton County, Philadelphia County, New York County, they're all pretty much the same. They're inefficient places. They're not designed for customer service. The kinds of things that you might get addressed in a few minutes at some private company get addressed in hours upon hours. They're understaffed. They don't smell great. And normally they are a shocking place, even if you are flanked by Secret Service members who are there to protect you. But of course, it was always going to be the case that the former president was going to receive special treatment at this jail because he is the former president. He is flanked by Secret Service members, and it is in both sides' interest to get in and out of there as quickly as possible. Jails are always concerned about disruptions. They're always concerned about safety. And again, they're under-resourced, understaffed. This particular jail is reportedly the source of an investigation by DOJ. So it's probably like most other large county jails, an unpleasant, unsafe, inefficient place to be, unless you're the former president.
So the next guy that walks in there tonight on an unrelated charge, it's not going to be 15, 20 minutes.
He will not ride back in a motorcade 15 or 20 minutes after he gets out. He will probably sit on a cot that is maybe an inch thick. If there is a cot, sometimes there isn't a cot. I've even seen photos of the Fulton County jail. It looks pretty similar to most other jails. Not a great place to be. Normally you get a full health screening. I don't think he's going to get that. But of course, it really depends on what they've worked out with Secret Service and maybe even with the sheriff in advance.
Yeah, we may be getting a little more on that. Laura, you've got some more of the court activity?
Yeah, it shows sort of the formal list of the charges. Again, you can see it on screen there with all of the different amounts for each of the individual charges. They break it up like that. That's standard. And again, in the top right-hand corner there, you can see his race, his weight, his height, all of the standard biographical information. And it just strikes me, as Danny was pointing out, there are so many differences in a case, obviously, involving the former president and having Secret Service there and not having to spend, more than 15 minutes in a situation like this in a jail cell. Of course not, but it does strike us, I think, that now that we're on our fourth one of these, that the system is holding. The system is still functioning. He is still putting up a bond amount. He is still actually having to be traipsed into a county jail. And so even though there are certainly striking differences between him and any other criminal defendant, I do think it is worth pointing out that he still does have to go through the indignity of this process.
Kristen Welker, you can't escape what we saw last night in the Republican debate. The people who are running against him, the people who want the job that he held, are having a difficult time condemning him. And what we're seeing here today, that will continue all the way up to Election Day.
It absolutely will. One of the most striking moments of that first GOP primary debate last night, Lester, was when the moderators asked if the candidates would continue to support former President Trump even if he is convicted of any of these crimes. And all of the candidates raised their hand to say yes, except for two, Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson. And so I think it speaks to the fact that, politically speaking, because when you look at the polls, we just released a poll this week of Iowa caucus goers, and he has a lead of 23 points over Ron DeSantis. So attacking him is just not popular. And these Republican candidates are really twisting themselves into knots, trying to figure out how to do it. I'm told by someone who is with him that they will be leaving soon. And so we expect to see his motorcade on the move soon, and we're trying to get reaction and trying to get more information about everything that has occurred with this booking process. But again, just an extraordinary set of events unfolding tonight.
And as we've seen in some of the other court proceedings or booking proceedings, the supporters of the former president have gathered. We're seeing it in Atlanta outside the courthouse. Gabe Gutierrez, what are you seeing?
Hey there, Lester. Well, a lot of these supporters had wanted to see the former president as he came into the Fulton County Jail. That did not happen, at least at this location, because he went in around the corner where my colleague Blaine Alexander is. But I can show you that this crowd, continues to stay here and wait to see if they might catch a glimpse if he were to pass by here. This entire street, it is shut down, Lester. This is Rice Street, very well known here in Atlanta. And if my colleague Randy Brown can pan over there and show the police presence, the sheriff's deputies that are across the street. And actually, you can see the sheriff's deputies. It might be tough to catch behind this sign here, but there are several of them that have been here really throughout the day. And we did see a ramping up of security earlier today as they put up more barricades, to try and make sure that this was an orderly process. So far, it has been. But again, several of Mr. Trump's supporters were hoping to catch a glimpse of him. But again, it's just historic. And I can tell you, Lester, from being at several of these other court proceedings in New York and also in Miami, it is remarkable to see a former president of the United States go through this, surrender to authorities here, now facing his fourth indictment. So the supporters here say that they will stay until he leaves. And again, they're hoping to catch one more glimpse of him, perhaps as he leaves Fulton County Jail, although he will likely do it from around the corner. Lester.
Yeah, and Gay, let me say, I'm glad you pointed out the historic nature of this, because we tend to easily get jaded with moments like this, right, because we're seeing the fourth one here, as you point out, in just less than 5 months. I want to bring in former federal prosecutor, NBC News legal analyst Carol Lamb. Carol, did we get a bit of a preview of the logjam to come in this case? The not just this case, all four, and the scheduling issues that could raise their heads?
Oh, we certainly have, Lester. What we've previously called a bumper cars problem with all of these trials butting up against each other. I think we now, actually, with Fani Willis's case, have a sort of broomstick problem where it's splintering into many different possible trials. And I think that Fani Willis, although she has said she really wants this trial to go quickly and to happen before the election, I think she realizes that that's likely not going to happen with all 19 defendants. And the former president has now told the court that he does not want to exercise his speedy trial rights here, the way Mr. Chesebro has. And so I think what's likely to happen is his trial will be far into the future, and Jack Smith's trial of former President Trump will probably go on much sooner.
All right, Carol, thank you. We're looking at the motorcade of former President Trump as it exits the jail complex right now. And I understand we've got some word about whether a mugshot was taken.
We have just been told by one of the former president's aides who is with President Trump that, in fact, it is their understanding that a mugshot was taken. These aides have not seen the mugshot yet, but again, they have been told that there was a mugshot. And so we are waiting to get more information about that. But that was one of the big questions looming over these proceedings. Would there, in fact, be a mugshot?
And there was a lag in some of the earlier defendants who
Yes.
came in. This we would expect to see before the night is over.
Well, and we've certainly requested it along with every other media organization, as you can imagine. And, we'd wondered whether the sheriff would do this, as he had said he was going to treat him like everybody else. But as Kristen has raised, there are political implications to doing so. And he might be able to use it for his own purposes. But for the sheriff's purposes, if you're trying to show even-handed administration of justice and going through the routine booking process, this is part of that process. But Lester, this is the first time he's had to do it. In every other surrender, in New York, in Miami, in Washington, D.C., he hasn't had to take a mugshot.
It is clear that he wanted to see this. He put the information out that he would be surrendering at 7:30 tonight on his own Truth Social.
Right.
So this was a moment that he wanted the nation to see.
Well, this is part of his strategy of energizing his supporters, Lester. This is part of the former president's way of making his case that he believes these are unfair proceedings. It is worth noting that in an earlier indictment, when there was not a mugshot taken, the campaign released a fake mugshot and released it on a fundraising email and raised a lot of money. It is an effective way to energize and rally his supporters. And now here they, it seems at this point, have the real thing. And so we wait for it to be actually released. But this is just a hugely significant, somber moment, a mugshot of a former president.
And this camera you're looking at, this is a pool camera. It's to feed to the press, so it's within the motorcade now as it leaves the area. Let's go back to Blaine Alexander. Have you seen, did the motorcade make it past you?
Absolutely. We saw it as it drove out of this gate, Lester. We saw it as it sped down the road, and we saw it as it disappeared from the streets. You know, I want to weigh in on that mugshot conversation, too. This is a decision that I know was not taken lightly. In fact, I understand that there were discussions and considerations as to whether or not this would happen, whether or not a mugshot would actually be taken up until today. So there was certainly a lot of weight behind this decision to take a mugshot. We understand that there were conversations, perhaps some who were pushing back on it. So certainly very interesting to see that it actually has materialized. Now, as for here outside of the jail, I want to just kind of clock how quickly that happened. He drove in and drove out. That motorcade left within 22 minutes. That is a stunningly fast amount of time when you talk about the fact that he was able to get inside, get fingerprinted, mugshot booked, and then leave the jail in that same motorcade. Again, some inmates, some people who come in here just on a normal day, if you or I were to come in here, it could take upwards of 12 hours to do the exact same process that we just saw unfold here. So we know, again, that the bond was already in place. We know that the booking information actually made it online before the former president even entered the building. So that just kind of speaks to how expedited this entire thing was. And certainly, again, though, the fact that he took a mugshot, very, very stunning moment here in Atlanta.
Yeah, Blaine, just very quickly, is the expectation he flies back to New Jersey tonight? All right, well, we continue to watch that motorcade as we briefly lose the signal. The former president, again, has been processed, formally booked, and as you just heard, we have confirmed that a mugshot was taken, which we presume will be released for the public at some point in the not-distant future. That concludes this NBC News special report. We'll continue coverage on our streaming network, NBC News Now.